What's up guys, welcome to a brand new adventure. Your main character for this one is a level 41 trader named Akor. As you can see, your stats are not really fit for combat. You mostly specialize in intelligence with a lot of dexterity, but you do have some acquired strength because you spent a lot of your playthrough on a horse or on a chariot. Right, riding a horse gets you some amount of strength. The setting for this whole adventure is ancient Rome, but more specifically the Roman Empire in the year 132 AD. Now by that point, the empire had spread virtually to every single corner of the European map. They were strong, they were winning, and they were conquering territories, battle after battle. Like this was when the empire was at its peak, it was at the height of its influence and expansion. Now, in the times of ancient Rome, and pretty much everywhere else during the early civilizations, your entire life depended on your social and economic status. If you were rich, you had a totally different experience than if you were poor. And if you were poor, well, your experience wasn't all that great, to say the least. Luckily for you, that's not something you really have to worry about, because you're not poor. In fact, you're quite rich. You're a trader and you've been trading all of your life. But your trades were not small trades. You come from a very wealthy family that has taught you the ins and outs of the bread business. One important distinction that we have to make is that you were not a Roman. You were Egyptian living in Egypt, which had by now become a province of the empire. Egypt, along with most of North Africa, was very abundant in resources. While they didn't really have that many metals that they could export, they made up for them with wheat and bread. When Egypt eventually became invaded by the Romans in the year 30 BC, the Romans created colonies all over the area and built new towns alongside existing Egyptian settlements. They really saw the value Egypt was bringing to them through agriculture, and they wanted to keep that system going. And that explains why you are currently on your way to Rome. You and your family had been making large bread deals with the Romans for decades now. That's what made you so rich. Particularly, you guys benefited quite nicely from their invasion, since they helped your agriculture grow. I mean, the Romans had a huge demand for bread, and it was much easier to export it now that you were a Roman province. You're on your way to meet with a new high-ranking official who wants a large, consistent supply of bread for the Roman people on behalf of the emperor himself. As usual, they want your company to supply bread for a large district in the city of Rome. Like, this was a very important deal and you really want to see it go through. Now, to get to Rome from Egypt, you wouldn't go by land. Taking the road would not only cost you a fortune more, but it would also take you like 4 times the amount of time to get there. Instead, it was much easier to just go by sea and cross the Mediterranean. The closest port to Rome was a port called Ostia. Now, since Rome wasn't exactly on the water, you had to station your boat to the nearest port and make the rest of the journey by horse. But like, don't worry, this really wasn't a long journey. It was like 15 kilometers from the port to the center of the city of Rome. Your adventure starts right at this port. You've been traveling for like a good 24 days now and have finally arrived on the Roman peninsula. After dealing with the legalities of arriving at a port and leaving your ship, you get on your chariot and start the last leg of your journey. This trip really shouldn't take you more than a few hours, if that. The only thing was that it was now nighttime. It wasn't exactly the safest time to make a trip, but you figure you might as well since your horses are quite fast and you know very well how to ride them. If anything bad were to happen, you would simply just gallop away. As you're riding your chariot, alone by the way, you hear a couple of horses coming from behind you. As soon as you look back, you know exactly what you're looking at. Kidnappers. Nobody rides like that in the middle of the night if they're not trying to capture something or someone. This isn't good. Like, going in the middle of the night was not the smartest decision that you've made. There's no time to lose, it's time to gallop. You're galloping very fast, so fast that you actually outrun the kidnappers, as you predicted. But don't get excited just yet, because it's nighttime, you don't see the trap that was laid out for you further up the road. Something you didn't really think about. You run into it, your horses trip, your chariot flips over, and you fall to the ground. Before you get a chance to get back up, somebody knocks your head with a club and renders you completely unconscious. Your eyes close and your vision fades to black. You wake up in a different chariot with a bunch of people that you've never seen before. It's daytime, which leads you to believe that it's currently the next day, and the people around you, they look like slaves. They barely have clothes, they look really damaged, and they're held captive. You then look at your own hands and realize that they're tied up as well. That's when you confirm that you've been kidnapped to then be sold to slavery. And slavery in the Roman Empire was very common and widely practiced. Although it wasn't the worst service to become a slave in, it was far from being a desirable class. And it didn't help that you came here alone. It was going to be hard to reach out to your family back in Egypt. Let me explain a little bit why this wasn't the best situation that you could find yourself in. The Romans viewed slaves as property, literal property to be bought, sold, used, and disposed of like an object. Slaves had no rights, they belonged completely to their masters, and even could be killed at any time if the master wanted to, without any legal repercussion. They were also really popular, making up of about 15% of the total population of the empire, with areas such as Rome having a much higher percentage, closer to 40% if not more. It's safe to say that the slave business was booming. You also had different kinds of slaves for different purposes. For example, you had private slaves who were owned by individuals or families, and then you had public slaves who were owned by the Roman people themselves. And this difference is very important because the life of each slave could differ greatly depending on where and for whom they were serving. The private slaves usually performed menial household tasks for their master, while the public ones were usually employed in public places like a bath, for example, or in temples. Some skilled slaves even worked as accountants or secretaries in government. The interesting thing about Roman slaves specifically was that they had a certain degree of freedom compared to other slaves like the Greeks, for example. One of the notable differences is that the Roman slaves could actually accumulate money to eventually, potentially, buy their own freedom. Sometimes they were also allowed to occupy property as long as they behaved well and followed orders. Like the property still belonged to their masters, as did their money, but if they behaved, they were allowed to use it and keep it. When they had downtime, they were also allowed to go to the Roman baths and enjoy some nice socializing with other Romans. It really all depended on who you were as a person and what kind of slave you would eventually end up being. If you were able, skilled, or even simply lucky, you could be put to good use and maybe you could get enough money to eventually buy your own freedom. If you're ugly, unskilled, or with defects, then your outlook did not look so great. The Chariot takes you and the other slaves to the Forum, the central place of business in the city of Rome. That's where like most transactions would take place, and of course, where slave auctions happened. You were about to be sold to the highest bidder, and there wasn't much that you could do about it. At the auction, one by one, they have you get out from the chariot. As they do, they make sure to cross-reference your names with the list that they have and give each of you a plaque to put on as a sort of necklace that bears your name, your age, your race, your ethnicity, as well as your features and defects, literally like a product. When it comes to your turn, they look at you and the slave trader asks his colleague to come and take a look at you as well. His colleague sees you, looks at your ethnicity, looks at his list that he has, and marks your right leg with a white chalk. And then he gives you your plaque and moves you along just like every other slave. Once at the auction, they take off all of your clothes, you're completely naked, and put you in line with the other slaves. You're second in line behind only a dwarf. You look around, and from what you can tell, it looks like they placed you in the order of amount of money they expect they can get from you. Like in the midst of this horrible situation, at least there's some comfort in the fact that you're second in line. You're the second most expensive, more expensive than everyone else, except for this dwarf. Bidding has now started for the dwarf. You see it go from the initial offering of 2,000 sestertii all the way up until above 3,500. Wow, that's a lot of coin. Knowing that a Roman legionnaire makes about 900 per year, this was ridiculous. But I guess this makes sense, like the Romans had a reputation for really liking novelty, and I guess a dwarf fits within that description. It's now your turn. They put you up on the platform and the bidding starts. People come, inspect you, read your plaque, and start bidding. It goes from 1,700 to 2,000 to 2,300 to finally 2,649 sestertii. Not bad. Not quite as much as a dwarf, but still not bad. That was a decent amount of money for a slave given the current circumstances. Right before the sale can be officially declared, a man from the back of the crowd declares an offer. 5,000 sestertii. What? That's like way above what everybody else was offering. Some people here can't even afford that. That's a ridiculous sum of money. Why is this man willing to pay so much for a slave all of a sudden? The trader looks around and sees if anybody else is willing to outbid this mysterious man. Of course, nobody dares to outbid that ridiculous amount. The slave trader declares you sold and sends you off to your new master. You have now been brought to the mysterious man's home. He sits you down and serves you a nice cup of wine. The house you were in was very luxurious for the time. Like, it was big, had multiple rooms, and was on the ground floor. These houses must cost a fortune, you think to yourself. You're not too sure who this man is. All that you can tell is that he's very rich, and that he doesn't look like he's from Rome. He looks like a foreigner. You're not sure because he hasn't really spoken a word to you since you've been with him. What could this man possibly have planned for you? You take a sip of your wine, and the man finally speaks. He introduces himself. His name is Raneb. Huh, that's an Egyptian name. That's very interesting. He tells you that it's by no accident that you're in his house right now. Your capture, your involvement in the slave auction, and finally your purchase were all planned and for a purpose. He takes a pause and finally says that you're about to make a large sum of money. More than you've ever seen in your entire life. You'll also be able to get back your freedom and be sent to Egypt with your family, no questions asked. All that you have to do is do him a small favor. He wants you to compete in the upcoming chariot race that's happening tomorrow, and he wants you to win. He wants you to get enlisted in the race, get on the chariot, and make sure that your team wins. Since you're so good with a horse, you'll be the perfect candidate for the job. Raneb, being a very wealthy man, would then make a bet on your faction and get himself a nice return on his investment once you win. Since you are new and kind of unknown, the odds would be heavily against you, making the potential win very, very big. He would then give you a cut of the revenue and ensure your freedom and a safe return back to Egypt. Sounds simple enough, right? Like, you've never actually raced a chariot, let alone professionally, but you've been riding them all of your life and you're pretty good at it. You're now starting to understand a little bit better what your role in all of this is going to be. It's going to be very interesting. But there's a problem, the man says. You're up against the best chariot racer in the history of the Romans. Like, this guy was literally on his way to winning over 1,000 races in his career, and you're right in the middle of it. The racer went by the name Diocles. Diocles was a phenomenal racer. Every single person in the city of Rome has heard about him, or at least heard of one of his victories. He would eventually go on to have an impressive 24-year career in which he won about 1/3 of his races. I said impressive because most chariot racers died in their early 20s because of the high likelihood of death at these races. Diocles somehow managed to survive all of his races, to win 1/3 of them, and then to eventually become history's best paid athlete, amassing somewhere around 15 billion of today's dollars. Like, yeah, this guy was no joke. He was the real deal, and you have to compete against him. Now, of course, to do that, you weren't going to leave it up to chance, or even skill for that matter. Like, why would you when there are other ways that you could guarantee a win? Ways that may or may not be legal. You see, the people of Rome really loved their chariot teams. They would get fanatically attached to one team and do everything in their power to get them to win. Some people chose to throw objects at the racers to get them to crash and die, while others resorted to commissioning powerful spells to ensure the same thing. Oftentimes, the best way to win was to make sure that everybody else lost, which means that everybody else died. It sounds extreme, I know, but this was actually the way that they did things. It was actually encouraged at these games. Perhaps because the people who pushed for such harsh methods of getting people to win were the same people who had bets on the winning teams. And of course, when you have a bet on a team, you want to do everything in your power to get them to win. It's just the way that things were being done back then. And that's actually something that you're gonna have to do. There's no way that you can win this race without some sort of external help. Raneb is a smart guy, and he knows that you are too. He's willing to listen to your opinion, and he gives you the choice of what you want to do and how you want to go about winning the race. He's offering you two different paths, or options, if you will. You are to choose whichever you prefer, and whichever you think has the best chances of winning you the race. But remember, this race is important, and there's a lot of money on the line. Make sure that you pick well. He tells you that he knows of a certain priest who, for the right amount of money, will give you a lead tablet with a spell on it that'll make sure that Diocles crashes his chariot, allowing you to win. Or he tells you that for the same amount of money, you could pay a few spectators to throw nails at your opponent to ensure the same fate. It's kind of a tough choice. Which one do you choose? Raneb says that he'll give you the money whichever option you take. You just have to make sure that it's the right option that's going to get you to win. If you do, like he said, you'll be rich and you'll be free again. If you don't, well, you can kind of expect to spend the rest of your life paying back the money you just lost them. So that's it guys, you now have to choose how this story is going to unfold. As usual, you have like 24 hours to vote, after which I will release part 2, whatever you guys have chosen. To vote, we're not going to do it on the video this time, it doesn't work, we'll do it like we did it in the community tab. So go to my channel or click the link in the description, it'll take you to the community tab on my channel and you'll see the poll with the options of what you want to choose. Make sure that you vote properly, make sure that you talk and leave comments with people, work collectively together, because there is a chance that you might fail this quest. So yeah guys, thank you so much for watching, thank you for being a part of this adventure, good luck, my name has been Darius and I will see you all tomorrow with part 2.